EdTech Monday Africa is brought to you by the MasterCard Foundation's Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in ICT and MasterCard Foundation's Young Africa Works. How early is too early to integrate technology in education? Can technology be used at the ECD level to lay the foundations for lifelong learning? If so, how? And what's needed to make that possible? In this month's EdTech Monday, we explore the use of technology in ECD and how it can help cultivate literacy, numeracy, and other 21st century skills in children.
A warm welcome to EdTech Monday. It's great to have you with us. This month we focus on early education and the use of technology, and we have an excellent panel with us. Joining us from War Child Uganda is Grace Okia, who is the education advisor, has done incredible work on education across the board. Also with us, we're happy to have Amanda Devercelli, who is the global lead for early childhood development at the World Bank. And we're very happy to have Joanne Mwachi, who is Regional Director of World Reader East Africa. She has a small team doing incredible work across the Eastern and Southern African region. And we'll hear more from Joanne. Thank you for being with us. Ladies, I want to, first of all, I'm celebrating this is an all-women panel. Great to have you all join us on this discussion on early childhood education. And maybe as a mother, let me start from the fact that, I have heard repeatedly that the early years are significant, 1 to 7 years in terms of really foundational development for a child. So, how important is it that we ensure we are using technology to aid learning for this cadre? And what are the gaps and opportunities here across the continent? Maybe, Joanne, let me begin with you.
Thank you very much, Julie. I am really pleased to be here and to share thoughts with you. I think it's really important to begin early exposure to technology because it's here, it's not going anywhere. The pandemic has really reminded us how important tech is in terms of getting through difficult times, with long distance learning and all. These children are being prepared for a life where technology will be much more integrated than it is now in 2022. So it's important that they start early so that they have the skills with which to live quality life. Do gaps exist? Yes, they do. I think a number of countries don't actually have policies around, say, technology within their countries. So obviously they cannot be able to operationalize. That's one. Number two, technology has not been part of our culture. And so we have to go through this whole process of introducing it, especially for the young children, where sometimes people think of tech and children and they're thinking that you are giving the tech to the child, when in reality, you're building the technology for the parents and for the teachers, but the beneficiary is the child. And so we have to get through those, cultural beliefs and, those cultural practices or thought processes that are not quite aligned to the use of technology. I think one last thing I would say also is that, and I think my colleagues sitting on this panel will perhaps share their thoughts around the same thing. Across the continent, ECD is not as valued as it should be. There are competing priorities in place. And so, parents going out of the way to take their child to ECD is not the biggest deal. That's one. Two, they have to pay for quality ECD. So that gap exists, and it's a discussion that needs to be had if we are not to leave any of our children behind.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Really eye-opening, this whole idea that the tech really is for the teachers and the parents, but the child benefits. And also the fact that ECD has been left behind. I'm going to come to you later to really talk through the challenges that leaving ECD, out of the priority list, what results for the continent in terms of challenges. So I'll come back to that. Let me come to you, Grace, now. And of course, we know so many young people end up left behind because of different things, including conflict, etc. How important is this when you do your work with the communities you are focusing on?
Yeah, thank you so much, Julie. Thank you for this interaction. It's really, really a very good opportunity, for us to interact and learn from each other. Yes, going back to your question, Julie, how important is it? As you mentioned earlier, I work with vulnerable children, majorly conflict-affected children. And so they go through a lot of challenges, first access challenges, for them to be able to acquire the educational opportunities that they do deserve. And then secondly, they go through the psychosocial challenges, because of the traumatic experiences they've been through. And then also the unique learning challenges to these kind of learners. And so technology is one of those factors that can facilitate learning for the conflict affected, for the vulnerable communities. And in my experience, given that this is a traumatized lot of learners, we have tried to integrate, technology in a way that it does not only contribute to learning outcomes, but also contributes to improved well-being or improved psychosocial well-being of the learners. And this is a very, very key aspect in this regard. And then secondly, the refugee learners or conflict-affected learners face challenges of language, which indeed impacts greatly on learning. And so one of the ways we're using technology is to help the refugee learners, the conflict-affected learners, develop foundational skills in literacy, foundational skills in numeracy and language, for them to be able to transition in their learning. So this makes technology, again, very, very paramount, if they have to advance.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And the aspect of understanding that tech opens up so much more. I mean, the focus on psychosocial is just as important on the learning itself, just really, really important insights. Amanda, let me come to you now. You've been working in this area for a while. I mean, I think it's 10 years since you launched the World Bank's Early Learning Partnership. Two things as you look at this is, number one, just the importance of the spotlight on early learning. Joanne highlighted earlier the challenges of us not focusing on it. And secondly, this link into technology. And people will argue they're competing interests. There's so much else we need to focus on. Why would this be important for these young ones? What would you say?
Thanks, Julie. So, first I'd start with what we know about how young children development and why these early years are so important, as you were saying. So we know that about 90% of all brain development occurs before a child is 5. We know that in the first 1,000 days, which includes the period of when the mother is pregnant through to about the first 2 years of life, that it's really critical that kids have lots of early stimulation, proper nutrition, proper care. Because this period is so critical for young children's development and for them to get those healthy inputs of health, nutrition, and stimulation, it's not about getting devices into young children's hands, right? Because actually, interaction, stimulation, back and forth with other children, with their parents and caregivers and teachers, that's the most important way for children to learn. So before the age of 2, they really shouldn't be on devices. And after the age of 2, they should have sort of limited devices that are providing strong cognitive content that will help them with their cognitive and socio-emotional development, help them get those pre-literacy and pre-numeracy skills. But where I think technology is so critical, and Joanne and Grace have alluded to it, is to help parents get information or inspiration and ideas for how to interact with their children and stimulate their children's development, so that all parents get information to really understand how to do the best they can for their kids. We know all parents want the best they can have for their children, but not all parents have the same information or opportunities to provide that to their children. I think technology is also critical for teachers and caregivers to help get them content, but also to be a support. I've seen some terrific programs that offer almost like a scaffolding for pre-primary teachers in the classroom to help them learn how to be better teachers and guide them through what a responsive and quality classroom looks like in the pre-primary years. And then I also think technology can be really important for quality assurance and monitoring, so that we can gather more information about how programs are working, how they're influencing children's development, and how we can improve them. And then the final point is around access for who, right? For which kids? How do we make sure the most disadvantaged kids are reached with quality programming? And that's where technology can be key in reaching children and families in remote areas. But again, it really matters what we're reaching them with. It's not the technology itself, it's the quality of the content, and the technology is the enabler to deliver it.
Key question, considering everything that's been shared, it's really clear we need an ecosystem approach to address these issues. And it's everything from parents to teachers training to infrastructure, services, partners there, to government. I wonder what you've seen that gives hope that this can be done and it can be done together. Do you have any excellent examples of what has worked well? And then maybe after that, we can talk a little bit more about partnerships. Joanne?
I will use ourselves as an example of what we are doing. We are using an approach we are calling ABCD approach, where we are looking at access for the A, access to which devices, so that as we work with communities, we are looking at what's the most appropriate technology to use for them. So right now we are using mobile phones, which are, something that's pretty common in people's hands. And in a country like Kenya, where uptake is very high, there is an opportunity to leverage that mobile phone for this kind of learning. Then two, we also are using tablets in school settings and things like that. And then two, we are looking at the books. What's the kind of content that's going out? What is within that content that makes an adoption of tech to be useful? Because I like what Amanda has said. Basically, technology is a tool. It's not about the device. It is a tool to help get one from point A to point B. So looking at the content or the books that the children are accessing through their parents, through their teachers, through their communities. And C, for us, is about continuous engagement. It's not about giving devices. It's about having a device, which you probably own in your home, which is a mobile phone or a tablet at school, where you can access content. And then there is continuous engagement. Engagement looks anything like reading with a child. It looks at activities with the child. So looking at literacy-based activities, social emotional learning activities, play-related activities. And within that technology, providing a guide for parents, caregivers, teachers to be able to actually use that content for the benefit of the child. And finally, I'll talk about D, which is data. As these activities are ongoing, there is back-end data that is being collected. We are GDPR compliant, so we are not. We do respect the privacy of the users, and so the data is anonymized. But say if we are working with a particular community, we can be able to observe the behavior on the device and inform the community, and they can come up with the interventions that will be useful and helpful to them. When I speak of community, it could be a community of early childhood centers. It could be a school that's up to grade 3 in that general space. So really focused, really targeted approaches to using technology in the early learning space, so that in the end, there is a culture of reading, there is a culture of lifelong learning, there is a culture of improving quality life.
The ABCD approach, I love it. Yes. Grace, over to you.
Now, one of the most important things, as far as planning for technology is concerned, and through our experience, is aligning it to the national curriculum objectives, And when this is done, it optimizes learning.
Yeah.
First, for the benefit of the child, yes, aligning it to the curriculum will help the child to progress, authentically, but also progress from simple to complex. And meaning learning is very much intentional and purposed. And then secondly, aligning it to the curriculum is, through experience, the ultimate goal for achievement of long-term impact. It is achievement of larger scale and consequently achievement of sustainability, which is ultimate. So while planning, like you mentioned earlier, it is very, very key to involve all stakeholders, as far as this is concerned. Remember, planning for EdTech is not different from planning for any type of learning, And so EdTech must be constructed within the principles of learning, that have been tested and proven over time. And one of those principles is self-centeredness, of the child-centeredness of the EdTech. So it's important that the child can use this or engage with the EdTech, or with the object, with the device, with whatever, in a very active manner, because learning has to be engaging, for it to be effective. And then it has to sustain the learning. Whatever technology used needs to sustain the attention of the learner, for learning to be effective. But also, most important, it should be aligned to the context, of the learner. Where is the learning happening? What interactions exist within the environment? All these are very key. And therefore, it's important that the one size fits for all, is never applied. I work with refugee learners, and what they go through is different from what children from other contexts are exposed to. And so it is unfair, to bring EdTech that cuts across. It will be unfair for some learners. So that is very, very important.
That's such rich insights. Thank you, Grace. Amanda, let me come to you with the same question.
So I think there are a couple different examples to highlight. So one program that's been well evaluated with impact evaluations is a program called the RISE program in Zanzibar. It's delivered through radio. But it wouldn't have to be delivered through radio. It could be delivered through other kinds of interactive audio instruction. It was supported, I think, by USAID initially, like 10 or 15 years ago, but taken up by the government and mainstreamed into a community-based approach. And basically what happens is 2 or 3 days a week in a community space, a community teacher, who is typically a young woman who maybe hasn't finished secondary school, comes and leads the children in the village through the activities that are broadcast through the radio. And the reason I think that this approach is effective is, first of all, it was a very high content, very high quality content that was developed, right? It was tested over time. It was refined and improved. It's very locally appropriate. So in the Zanzibari context, for example, you would have the boys on one side of the room, the girls on the other side of the room, partnering with each other. It relies on local materials. So the kids come with shells and strings to do their math and counting or to measure. And it guides the teacher, right? So it's a teacher who doesn't have a lot of formal training or experience, but it guides the teacher. Now we're going to do a song. Okay, now teacher, call on a girl. Now teacher, call on a boy who's sitting in the back, right? So it helps remind and helps the teacher do a better job than they might on their own. So that's one great example. There's good impact evaluation evidence showing that children who participated in that program have better learning outcomes than children who haven't. And what's really great about that program is now 10 or 15 years after the original donor support, it's still running. I think some of the other examples we have are gamification, right? So, I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, and they are doing their times tables every day for 5 to 10 minutes a day using a game on my phone or on my husband's phone. And that's easier to get them to do than it would be if we were trying to sort of do it without a game where they can get points and buy new outfits and advance levels and compete in a friendly way with their friends. And that's supported through the school. So I think also that family home partnership that is so important for any kind of learning is also really important for ed tech. And then I think maybe a last example that we saw during the COVID-19 context is there are a lot of home visiting programs around the world where the most at-risk families are typically identified in a community, and then a home visitor goes into the home and works with the parents, gives them information, models how they can interact with their young children and do learning activities at home. And when that stopped, people had to get more creative about how to use technology to reach those families. And there have been some great examples of how they are, using smartphones or even, basic phones to send parents prompts and encouragement on activities they can do with their children, but also to get information back from the parents about, how are you doing today? How's your child doing? I think some of that back end information that Joanne was talking about has been really valuable to understand. Are community workers reaching the most vulnerable families? How are they responding? So I think those are a couple of examples that I could highlight.
Thank you. We're going to talk about partnerships in a moment, but first I want to rewind a little bit to the comments Joanne made earlier around, the focus on this particular area, and just bring the question to you within the ed tech community, but even at large, how much attention is going into childhood education, and what do you think we need to do to get to the right place with regards to this? This time, let me start with Grace.
Yeah, I think one of the most and very important point here is to collaborate, collaborations between the different stakeholders, collaborations with educators, collaborations with parents, the government, ministries of education, the donors, all this working together to understand the EdTech ecosystem. There are so many aspects that contribute to this. First, there is need for us to understand the impact of EdTech. And so there should be a team that works, to establish what is the impact and where is evidence, what works and what does not work. And then secondly, where are we going to find the funding? There are challenges in terms of infrastructure, in terms of connectivity, in terms of devices, in terms of the human resource, all this needs to be thought about. And it requires a collective action because of the multifaceted nature of the challenges that face the EdTech, ecosystem. So working in collaboration with donors, understanding what are the donors' interests and how can we align to the donors' interest? How can we work together with the donor to fund what we think is most impactful rather than just funding what the donor wants? You get it? So all this is very, very important, working collectively together with stakeholders and then aligning to the government educational priorities on EdTech or on learning is also very key. So it requires us working together with the governments, rather than working in isolation. NGO is working alone, private sector is working alone, and then educators are struggling on their own. There is need for that complementarity.
Thank you for that. Look, Amanda, you've been doing this work for years now. So, and a lot has been achieved. But where are we now and how much more do we need to do?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been progress, but we have a lot left to do. So I've worked for the World Bank for almost 12 years now. And I will say when I started at the bank, and if we had a meeting with a minister of education, early childhood was never on the list of priorities. It just wasn't there. Now, I think it would be rare to find a country where it wouldn't be on the top 3 to 5 priorities, right? And I think that's thanks to great research and great work by different organizations in the last 5 to 10 years. People understand now a lot more about how children's brains develop, and we have a lot more economic evidence, right? We have the Nobel Prize winner James Heckman, who made it very famous graph that showed that the best time to invest to get the biggest returns is when children are their youngest. So I think people are aware now of the need to invest more in early childhood, but we still have a disconnect when it comes to actually making the decision to use scarce resources and invest in early childhood education. Most countries in the Africa region are spending less than 5% of their education budget on early childhood education, even though those children are maybe 20% of the population of learners. We have probably between 20 and 30% of children in African countries with access to early childhood education today, but in many countries on the continent, it's less than 10%. So there is a huge distance between, where we are and where we need to go. We know that countries have constraints. They feel a lot of pressure to invest maybe more in their secondary education. They're worried about unemployed youth and skills. Those are really important places to invest too. But one of the things we've tried to do at the World Bank is do a better job of making the case for investments in early childhood education and making the linkage between those investments and other public policy priorities. So I'll give you an example. A lot of countries have increased their budgets for skills or jobs training programs in the education space. So one of the things we've done is say, well, wait a minute, why don't we return some of that money to early childhood education by training people to work as early childhood educators, or to train them to work in childcare centers and open their own childcare businesses. In Liberia, we have a great example of this kind of approach of integrating early childhood development into skills and jobs training programs. It's called the Adolescent Girls Empowerment Program. And what we've done there is we've offered early childhood education as a training track option for young women. We've aligned it to the government standards and curriculum, as Grace was suggesting, so that it gives a pathway into the civil service. But we've also offered a track that includes business training skills. So women can open their own small business as a childcare center or a private low-cost pre-primary school. We've had incredible results, more than 90% completion of the training, more than 90% employment in the early childhood sector 6 months after completion, increases in savings, decreases in intimate partner violence, increases in women's empowerment and sense of self, all of these outcomes we want to see. And now we have an impact evaluation running to actually look at the quality of childcare and early childhood education being provided in those centers and the outcomes on children. So that's an example of where maybe we accept that early childhood education isn't a priority for every country when compared with so many other priorities, but we find out what their priority is and we link it up. I think women's empowerment is another big area where you have a lot of countries focused on female labor force participation and increasing employment. And if we can make the case that developing quality jobs in early childhood education or childcare is a great pathway to increase access to early childhood education, but also enable more women to enter the workforce and have quality employment themselves. So we just need to be creative. And I'll finish by saying one of the things we're proud of at the World Bank is that when we look at our education portfolio over the last 5 to 10 years, we've more than doubled early childhood education within that portfolio, both in terms of the proportion and the overall amount of money going to early childhood education within the total education budget. And what's important about that is the World Bank doesn't dictate programming. Our programming responds to what countries demand and request. So that's a really nice indicator that we are seeing more demand from governments to invest in early childhood education, but we need to see even more because it's not enough.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I think it's an important point made about how we can work to ensure transformation and impact. Grace, you said, we've got to see how to align to donor priorities. Well, you would assume that any funder coming in, their priority has got to be positive transformation. And we've learned on our journey as the foundation where we center ourselves and our work really as the MasterCard Foundation is asking, the institutions, African institutions, because we largely work with Africa, Indigenous institutions, we do work in Canada with Indigenous communities. It's going to African and Indigenous institutions and asking, what do you know? What do you need? How can we work together to achieve the impact? Because ultimately, hopefully, anybody who's coming into fund is looking to have positive transformational impact. Maybe with that, I want to just come to teachers for a moment and focus on how we can best support our teachers to get the skills required to really succeed in delivering quality, effective learning for early childhood education. Joanne?
The children are at the center of the ecosystem. So that means that there are many levels of investment that needs to happen in order for the child to benefit. And of course, one of them is teachers. And so our teacher training programs are quite they're quite analog, I would say. And for many colleges, there are people who start these non-accredited colleges, and so we cannot guarantee that the teachers going into schools are actually accredited. But that's something that the government can work on quite easily. Some simple forms of accreditation that will support teachers to work much more effectively and efficiently with young learners. And I think the example given of Liberia is actually a really good workable solution. One of the things that I think we need to do is provide resources to invest in teachers. I've mentioned that our teacher training programs are quite analog. So teachers are sometimes put in a difficult position because either there's a government policy or a donor comes in and says, we are going to do an EdTech program, and the teacher receives 1 day of training. It's not enough. We need teacher coaching. We need teacher training. We need teacher coaching on a sort of continuous basis so that they can acquire the skills with which they can teach. They can integrate the skills into their day-to-day activities with young children. They can troubleshoot, simple problems like change of language on tech or whatever, that they can be able to apply those skills and apply those skills to different environments so that when, the tech changes, because tech becomes obsolete pretty quickly, when the tech changes, they are still agile enough to use it. So that means that there has to be a deliberate effort to invest in the teachers, give them the right skill set so that they can be able to carry this long term, so that it's not just a short-term thing that lasts within a project and comes to an end.
Absolutely. So give them the skills, but they need the ongoing support. We need to make this sustainable. There needs to be ongoing development and retraining, if that's a term. Thank you. Grace, let me come to you. And, the unique skills needed by teachers to deal with, young people who have come from trauma or who are dealing with really difficult circumstances. How do we support the teachers?
First, we need to understand that a teacher is a central factor to teaching and learning. And it's not different from EdTech, A teacher is central to learning, even when it comes to the use of EdTech. So there is need to involve a teacher, right from the very start. If we have to integrate technology effectively. So first, even before we come to training, the teachers' attitudes, the teachers' perceptions, of technology is very, very key. How do teachers perceive, EdTech? And through experience, when we launched our digital innovation in Uganda, we trained the teachers, gave them a 5-day training and, sent them to their schools to implement. Unfortunately, the teachers did not. Why? Because they felt, first of all, this was an additional role to them. It was an addition to what the overload that they already have. And so they did not. Secondly, the teachers actually discouraged the children, the parents, from joining in the digital classes. Why? because of their own perceptions, the negative perceptions, about EdTech, how it ruins morals, how it teaches children to behave in a manner that is not acceptable in society. So teachers need to be, first of all, empowered, to understand the value of EdTech. And through evidence that is available, a teacher will only perceive EdTech as very useful if it is aligned to the curriculum that they deliver, So it again goes back to alignment. And then secondly, just a 5-day training, a 1-day training is not adequate for a teacher who has a low professional level in education, which is a characteristic of the teachers we work with, especially teachers supporting the refugee learners. Some of them do not have high qualifications. And so technology is a new tool to them. It is totally something new that requires a more prolonged period of training, but also continuous mentorship and coaching of the teacher. Now, most paramount, what I would say, to have a more sustainable approach to teacher training or more impactful, it would be very, very important to integrate not a teacher training components into, again, the educational policies within the national countries, within the countries. That goes back to institutionalization of the approaches that we use. How possible is it for us to integrate these approaches within the national education system so that instead of picking a handful of teachers, remember, training of teachers is very costly. Instead of picking a handful of teachers and training them for 5 days, the teacher would be trained right from the training college, from the university, on the approach that is to be delivered. So that is very, very key. Institutionalization of approaches for sustained teacher training and development. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Grace. Amanda?
Thanks. Well, I think Grace and Joanne have covered just about everything. I'll just add a few points, but I completely agree with the point Grace made about the importance of institutionalization and the point that both Joanne and Grace made around continual support for teachers. And I think a couple of things I want to add. One is recognizing the conditions in which many teachers are teaching on the continent today. They may have 40 children in their class. They may have 70 children in their class. And they may have children ranging in age from 3 to 12 in an early childhood education classroom, right? Because depending on the country's system, children may have to progress through early childhood education before they can go to primary, even if they come late. So if they show up as a 9-year-old, they might still have to go through those classes. So I think that we need to think about technology as a tool to make the teacher's job easier, right? So a couple of things come in there. One is around teaching at the right level. There's some great programs on teaching at the right level where you can use technology to help understand where children are, each individual child is, and then adjust the pre-literacy or the pre-math, the pre-numeracy skills that you're having each child work on based on where they're starting from. That's really important because we know children develop at very different paces in their early years. Even if they're all on track, they can, reading can happen for one kid at age 5 and one kid at age 7. And there's no problem with that. Kids develop at different paces. So you need to, in the early childhood education space, be able to meet kids where they are. So one is helping teachers understand where individual children are and tailor content to them. Another is sort of the ongoing support for teachers, sharing with other teachers, right? So teachers' WhatsApp groups or virtual mentorship circles or virtual mentorship and support and quality assurance visiting, use of videos to see what's happening in the classroom and then give teachers feedback on how to improve. These are all good examples. And then I think also another place where technology can be helpful for teachers is in their pre-service training. So one of the challenges on the continent is that there is not enough differentiated training for teachers of pre-primary school versus teachers of primary school. So you may have teachers just getting a normal training for how to teach children who are in primary school, but then they end up teaching 3 and 4 year olds. A child of 3 or 4, their brain is in a different place. They need much more play-based learning, much more stimulation. It's a totally different classroom. If you see a skilled pre-primary teacher in a classroom with 30 3 and 4 year olds, and they've managed to have order and learning happening in that space, it's like bow down, because it is such an incredible skill to see a skilled pre-primary teacher. But we have to give them the tools and the knowledge to be able to do that. You can't just expect an 18-year-old who's maybe just out of secondary school to show up in that classroom and be ready. It takes time to learn that. And I think using technology to get better pre-service training for teachers on early childhood specifically, and then to support them through their journey and becoming better teachers as they go is really critical.
Thank you so much for that. And, I think we all now understand just how much those teachers do, because during this this COVID-19 period, a lot of parents at home trying to manage 1, 2, 3 children and really struggling. So fully understood that is a skill that really needs to be honed, developed, and it's a specialized skill for those ages. I'm coming to a final question in a short while, but first we've had a few views come in online. Let's take a look at what people think about this subject. Thank you for sharing your views. And now back to our panel. Thank you so much for your time. Just as we close, literally in 30 seconds, is there a partner you have a word for, you'd like to, say something to? And if so, what would you like to say? Just to give you a chance to speak to someone out there that you're keen to engage with, to work with, to collaborate with. And we did emphasize the importance of collaboration. On this one, Amanda, let me start with you.
I won't name a specific partner, but I will say parents, because I think certainly in the COVID-19 context, we all recognize that parents were the frontline, teachers of their children. But that's true all the time. And that was true before COVID, and it's going to be true after COVID. So I want to reach out to and encourage and support all the parents with young children. It is so hard to raise young children some days, and what you're doing at home and how you are supporting their learning and the development and getting them ready to succeed later on in life is critical. So hang in there and keep up the good work, and just remember you can create many small opportunities for learning and development in everyday activities.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joanne.
Like Amanda, not calling out a specific partner, but really thinking about our governments. Governments are voices of authority. And so if the government can endorse certain activities, whether it's, in the digital reading space or in the EdTech space, I think there is an opportunity for parents to really learn, accept, embrace, if it's coming from a voice of authority. I think the government also has a responsibility to really communicate the value that EdTech brings into the household, because in our operations, many people still have misconceptions about technology, which then creates amongst all other challenges around implementing EdTech programs, then creates another layer that needs to be addressed. So I think a lot more advocacy work so that our parents, our communities can respond to the voice of authority.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Grace, you have the final word.
Yes, thank you, Julie. I agree with what Amanda and Joanne have said. But just to add on their voice, yes, I will speak to the donor, And first, I would like to say thank you so much to ECHO, for funding digital innovations across Africa, globally. And, this has created a lot of impact. And I want to say, yes, it is very important for all of us to work together with the donor, so that these interventions are funded. But while they are funded, they should meet, the need on the ground. And so in that note, I also call upon the partners, that we work with, the partners in EdTech, that, it is not good to work in isolation. If we want to reach far, if we want to achieve more, then we need to work together. And so it is important that we collaborate and complement each other because of the nature of the challenges that are involved in EdTech. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. What a way to end. Thank you to an incredible panel for a very rich discussion. And thank you to everybody joining us. Join us again next month. We'll be back here on EdTech Monday with more on how to improve the quality of education through technology in Africa. Asanteni, Kwaheri.
EdTech Monday Africa was brought to you by the MasterCard Foundation's Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in ICT and MasterCard Foundation's Young Africa Works.